Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is, when is enough enough? How much suffering do we have to endure before we finally make a choice for our own well-being? It should be an interesting conversation, but before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel those sensations, the friction, the temperature, the motion, the pressure, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm thinking it looks like we might be having some technical challenges. I'm not sure if that's true or not. Looks like Facebook isn't loading, so I don't know if you can see us. Let's see. I'm getting a not secure notification about this, about the Facebook site. Interesting. And it's just not loading. So I don't know if you're seeing me or you're not. And if you are, I would there's Rosalind. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us this morning. I'm really glad you showed up, because now I know that we are actually live. So that's great. We are talking about, when is enough enough? Like, how much suffering do we have to endure before we finally make a change? And this conversation is coming up because of a conversation that I've been having ongoingly with a client and friend who has been suffering through a relationship, and I would say a breakup, but it's sort of an on again, off again, in again, out again kind of situation. And there's all these intense ups and downs, and it is beyond me to understand what it's going to take, like how much pain this person has to endure before they are willing to let go. Good morning, Robin. So good to have you here with us this morning. So we're looking at, when is enough enough? Like, how much torture does a person need to experience at another person's hand? You know, it's their experience of torture, and obviously they're contributing to it. They're being present for it. They're engaging in this codependent dynamic. But I truly, it is a form of addiction, as far as I can tell. And even with addiction, you know, we look at these behavioral patterns that we have, where we do the same thing over and over and over again and experience the same pain and anguish and suffering over and over and over again. And we continue to do that until finally we don't. And usually the thing that has to happen in order for us to be willing to make that change is that we, they say with addicts that you need to hit rock bottom. And like the suffering, the pain needs to be so extreme that you just can't continue the other behavior somehow. It's not rational. So trying to understand it from a rational space is kind of an exercise in futility, right? Because it's not rational. It's not rational behavior. It's so fascinating to me. So Rosalind says, what do you replace the thinking pattern with, or how do you break the behavioral thought pattern? Well, I think it takes a really, really dedicated commitment. I remember when I was going through deep depression, and I think that in its way was also an addiction. It was a pattern of behavior that I couldn't find my way out of. And what I did was I deliberately forced myself into other thought patterns, into other patterns of behavior, to try to elevate my mood and to elevate my thinking. And eventually that took hold. So I think it takes deliberate and constant commitment. And the thing is that the desire, the yearning, the longing can be so intense that we just succumb to it, we give into it. And the consequences are extreme. And over and over and over again, it's a form of insanity. It's like banging your head against the wall, and it's like, oh, it hurts so much when I bang my head against the wall. And the solution is stop banging your head against the wall. It's not that tough. Just stop doing that. You would think it's not that tough. But apparently in so many cases, because there are conflicting emotions and drives and desires, that we succumb to, then it gets complicated with even deeper upset, even deeper self-hatred and frustration. So Rosalind says, so it requires a person to want a change. If someone comes to you, then they are seeking a different path. You would hope so, right? You would hope so. You would hope that someone, like, they are seeking a different path and they're caught in a loop, and watching somebody banging their head against the wall relentlessly and and being bloody and bruised is just really, really painful, and they're not going to stop doing it until they stop doing it. Good morning, Jen. It's so good to have you here with us this morning. We are talking about, when is enough enough? Like, how much pain do we need to experience before we're willing to make a change that is self-supporting? That there are all different kinds of addictions, I guess. And there's physiological addictions, there's emotional addictions, there's behavioral addictions. And what happens is that all these things get interwoven with each other and amplify each other and override our rationality, override our ability to access choice. And you know, there's an endless, it's like an endless loop until it isn't. And I know we've all heard that, you know, with addiction, you need to hit rock bottom. And I am seeing that in the context of relationship as well. That good morning, Jenny, welcome. Oh, I think Jenny, you're here with us, two different incarnations. Well, welcome. It's great to have you here with us. Anyway, these addictive loops of behavior, but also behavior of thought. I think that we can have addictive thought loops too. You know, that we tend to just repeat and repeat and repeat, and it's like being a robot. You know, it's like we've lost ourselves to this endless loop of pattern that is destructive. Jenny says, I heard you have to hurt enough to change. Isn't that crazy? So the hurt of the situation that you want to change has to be worse, so much worse than the pleasure that you gained from it in order to make that change. And it's often a life devastating level of hurt in the face of drug addiction. And you know, the hurt has to be so extreme to counteract that other dimension of addiction. Rosalind says, to break down the story, does it require to validate or look for evidence to support the false story? To break down the story, does it require to validate or look for evidence to support the false story? I'm not quite sure how to untangle that. You know, I think it goes beyond the story. Jenny says insanity. It is insanity. I think it goes beyond the story, Rosalind. I think it goes beyond, because it's not rational. It's not rational. When we know that we're going to get hurt, when we know that that's going to be the outcome, and we keep hoping that the outcome's going to be different, you know, that we can keep going back and we keep believing, or because we want things to be different, we keep believing that the outcome's going to be different. It's not rational. It's not rational. Or we keep wanting what we want. We want to play fairy tale games with ourselves, you know, like we tell ourselves lies about what's about what's there. And even though we know it's that someone else's behavior, for instance, every time we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to them or to get close to them, that then we get hurt. If we know that and we keep going back again and again and again, hoping that we're not going to get hurt, it's insanity, right? You know, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is one of the definitions, right? And it's also like wanting that hit of positive attention or love or the momentary feeling good, regardless of the cost, that keeps us coming back. And it's all, I guess it has to get to the point where the cost is so devastating that it completely overwhelms the desire for the positive. It defies logic. It defies reason. It defies wisdom and good sense. You know, it's an addiction, and it's interesting, you know, like when people have an addiction, for instance, to alcohol, you can't have one drink, you know, or an addiction to heroin, you can't just have a little bit of heroin. You know, it's gonna put you back just right. Like one drink means a bender, or you know, it's just crazy. Jenny says the addicted mindset is a hard battle to overcome. 100%, 100%. Rosalind says, I used to tell myself a story that kept me in a loop. Be the bigger person, to hold space for the other person to change, even though the cost was against my core values. I didn't know my core values or was in touch with them. So Rosalind, thank you for sharing that story, because I think that that's a story that so many of us have. And the story is, be the bigger person to hold space for the other person to change, even though the cost to you is great. Well, so here's the thing. You don't need it. You can be the bigger person and hold space for that person to evolve. It doesn't mean that you have to make yourself a victim of theirs. It doesn't mean just because I can see the diamond that you are inside doesn't mean I have to subject myself to your toxic behaviors until you find that diamond, right? And we get to value ourselves and our own well-being also. So holding out for someone else's revelation and someone else's growth, and subjecting yourself to toxic experiences because you're holding out for them, that's not a necessity. It's not something that it probably doesn't even serve the other person that you're trying to serve, you know, to support them in their toxicity. I don't know that it even serves them. We get to weigh those things all the time. You know, maybe we can make an inroad, and maybe that's worth it to us. You know, maybe that inroad that we can create with this other person is of greater value to us than the pain that they may cause or the toxicity of being around them. That's something we get to weigh all the time. But I always coach people, be willing to know what you know. If you know somebody's toxic, or your interactions with them are toxic, then be willing to be aware of that. You know, if you get a sense that somebody is not somebody you can trust to have the same values you have, and not somebody that you can trust to behave in a way that is that has integrity, then be willing to know that, and don't turn the other cheek and pretend that or expect that they're going to behave differently. Be willing to know what you know. Jenny says, I found the program called SMART. Its toolkit is so helpful. It's an excellent upgrade from old system 12 programs. 12-step programs. Interesting. I don't know about SMART. I haven't heard of it. Jenny, thank you for bringing it to our attention. I think it would be an interesting thing to look into. I think the notion of it makes me think of 12-step, and I'm not steeped in 12-step at all, but I know that one of the basic tenets is to give our will over to a higher power, because we're not in control. We're not able to be in control, and we trust a higher power to care for us. I like the idea of trusting our higher selves. I think that there is a place where we can pull ourselves out of addictive behavior by connecting to a greater self, perhaps, which is probably the same thing that people do when they connect to a higher power. I just don't know that we all have our own perspectives and beliefs around this. I'm inclined to think that the higher power resides within us. But I used to be, I have tendencies, I'll say I still do probably have tendencies to be a compulsive eater. And it was something that was very much where I felt very much out of control. It was addictive type behavior where I would just eat and eat and eat and eat until I felt sick almost. And I can see where I still have tendencies in that direction, but I eat much more healthily. So and I'm able to have some constraints around it. So Jenny says smart and is similar to 12-step, but more contemporary. Thank you, Jenny. It's interesting because in that cycle of self-destructive behavior, there's also a tremendous amount of self-judgment and self-hatred and feeling powerless, feeling at the effect of. And I know that in the throes of addictive behavior, it's really, really hard, because there's this compulsion, this yearning, this longing that just needs to be satisfied. It's like it takes a life of its own, takes on a life of its own. And penetrating into that, it's you can't make that decision for someone. Maybe you can help bolster them along the way. Maybe you can help to ease some of the pain, but the choice has to come from within. And it just seems that it has to come from going beyond a certain threshold of pain. So where the pain is just so great that it finally acts as the catalyst to make the change. And then it can happen. But it's like a choice that's in total and complete alignment. and the rational aspect of it is just not as strong as the emotional, physiological, behavioral, whatever the yearning is. And people are only ready when they're ready, I guess. We can do things to encourage it. We can do things like there's NLP processes where you can amplify the pain in an experiential or an imaginal space to amplify the pain such that it overwhelms the desire. So Robin says, I'm listening. I can say I'm in a somewhat similar relationship, which I'm working through. My heart goes out to you, Robin. Robin says, realizing you're the common denominator. Yeah, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. And it's so if we can love ourselves through it and recognize, that there's this yearning that is getting fulfilled. And there's fear about change. And, it's a whole big emotional dynamic for sure. Jenny says, habits numbing out emotional pain to change means go through the pain to heal. Yes, yes. The habit is numbing out emotional pain. To change means to go through the pain and heal. Yes, it does, 100%. That avoidance is not the path to healing, unfortunately. It may be that path to survival in this moment, but ultimately the avoidance itself becomes a destructive force. So anyway, that's it for this morning's musings. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I so appreciate you all for engaging in these sometimes tough conversations and inquiries into human beingness, right? Crazy, crazy, crazy beings that we are. So anyway, I encourage you to check out the other awesome programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And until next time, so much love to you.